So I'll go ahead and start. You can switch the slide, please. I'm Angie Hacker. I'm the CCEC Statewide Best Practices Coordinator, and I'm based in Carpinteria, California. I'm joined today by other members of the CCEC team, including Ryan, Gabby, John, Kelsey, who I'll invite to say hi over chat. And for those that weren't with us last month, I want to tell you a little bit about what we're here to do together today. So this meeting series is designed to create a regular space for local governments and those that work with them to help each other learn about opportunities to advance their energy and climate work. So if it's anything like the first meeting that we had last month, it's going to feel a little bit like a fire hose of information. But as a former sustainability division chief that worked inside of a local government, I know that your time is limited and you would appreciate a quick summary of all the news and best practices and opportunities in our industry. So I really think this time together is going to be an efficient and useful investment of an hour. So you can stay in the know and then get back to the grind, get your nose back to the grindstone. So we see these meetings, by the way, as an interactive conversation, two ways between local practitioners and partners who are often seeking to better support local governments. And we're really fortunate because today's conversation is going to be focused on how federal policies can translate to local energy and climate opportunities. And we're really grateful to have U.S. Congressman Salud Carbajal with us today. He represents California's Central Coast, and I'm going to introduce him more fully a little bit later on, and he is going to come on after we go through some opportunities. So once we get through those, we'll bring on Congressman Carbajal, and we'll do some Q&A. So be thinking about questions you might want to ask, and you can go ahead and drop those in the chat as we go. We'll save those until the end of his remarks, and then we're going to wrap up with an Ask the BPC, that's me, segment, which is basically a place to ask for help finding information for your work. And so you can also be thinking about where you might try to outsource an ask to help move your work forward. And the last thing I want to say is, before we begin, don't stress about taking notes. The slides, the recordings are going to be distributed after today's meeting. And by the way, we also take the extra step of compiling all the resources that come up at these meetings and dropping those on our website as well. And you'll see in the chat, John's going to be busily offering links. Okay, next slide, please. So this is our first opportunity for some roundtable sharing. Like I said, this is interactive. So if you are aware of opportunities that can support your peers working in local governments or working with local governments, this is an opportunity for you to share information. And you can do that by using the chat feature, or you can also raise your hand if you have something you'd like to share. But I've got quite a few opportunities that I want to highlight. So while you're thinking, I'm going to start, and folks can let me know if other things are popping up in the chat. And so we're starting to see, in general, sort of high level perspective, federal and state investments that are turning into opportunities. So it went from policy and now it's going through the machinations on an administrative level. And there's going to be more coming, obviously, as Congress moves forward with its infrastructure and spending packages. So we're going to hear more about that in a bit from Representative Carbajal. So still, we are recommending to look outside the box or outside of your wheelhouse of energy and climate for things that are related, but might look more like disaster mitigation, emergency management, health, and economic development. And I have a few grants I want to highlight. One is SoCal Gas Grant. There's just 3 grants that are available for local governments in SoCal Gas territory, up to $50,000 to support adaptation planning, and that's due on the 12th, so there's not a lot of time. Hopefully, if you want it, you've already begun, but I want to make sure that was on your radar. The California Energy Commission has a couple of grants available right now. One is for projects that provide workforce training and development for zero emission vehicles. Infrastructure and related technologies, commercial technologies, and that's specifically for priority populations. So if you're working on workforce development and have an interest in EV, that might be something that you can take a look at. That one's due December 2nd, so it's coming up. Another one from the CEC, this one's a big one. It's offering grants to, it's not more of an R&D grant, but it also has a group dedicated to offering grants for demonstration projects. So demonstrating vehicle and building technologies. What that means is basically plug-in vehicles that can be used as backup storage. So they want to test this out and they want to actually demonstrate some projects in public facilities located in disadvantaged or low income communities. So it might involve some partnership building, but I wanted to make sure that was on your radar as well. That one's due January 7th. And so we talked about the EDA grants last time. There's 2 more that are still available. And so these are economic development grants that favor climate action. So if you can tie economic development to climate action, then you'll be in good shape. And so one of our participants last month remarked that the Economic Adjustment Assistance Grant was somehow easier to take advantage of amongst all of these other opportunities. And I want to share that it's on a rolling application basis, but probably good to get it in earlier just to get in the queue. And then finally, just a reminder, we talked about this last time, the FEMA Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities Grant. We reviewed it in full at our last meeting. I'm not going to do it again, but this one can support the implementation of climate resilience projects, and the sub-applications to Cal OES are actually due December 1st. So keeping that on your radar. And then we also, besides funding, we talk about some other opportunities for assistance. This month, what I wanted to do was just highlight a couple of resources to help with electrification. So if that's something you're working on, I want to mention that the Building Decarbonization Coalition offers help to California local governments with REACH code that are developing REACH code ordinances. So that could look like technical assistance or finding templates and examples. If you're working on REACH code ordinances, I'd also recommend mining information from the localenergycodes.com, which is a statewide resource. It's a website, and it offers maps of REACH codes by jurisdiction, and it also provides the ordinance and staff reports for download. So it's really handy if you do what we all do, which is sort of borrow from each other. And finally, before we hand it off to our discussion of the day, or actually we have a spotlight, there are so many opportunities for input right now. My head spins, yours might be too. It's hard to find the time to provide input, but they are important. OPR is requesting input on the draft regions for the new Community Economic Resilience Fund. So that's that opportunity just received $600 million from the recent state climate package. So it's the input is due tomorrow, but I want to just put this on your radar because it's signaling that this program is getting ready for liftoff. And I think it will be among the best opportunities for folks that are doing, the work of tying economic development to clean energy. So that's on your radar. And CARB wants input on a couple of things. It wants input on its proposed funding plan for clean transportation, and that would be due by the 19th as a public comment period. So if you are doing clean transportation work and you want access to funds and you want to make sure that the funding opportunities work for you, you might consider providing comment. CARB is also working with us at SEEK to co-host what will be more of an intimate feedback session on its local government actions appendix, and that's an appendix to its 2022 scoping plan. So what that means is what are the priority actions? What are they finding are the top actions that local governments can do in their climate action work? And they want your input on that and on a sensitivity tool that goes along with it. So stay tuned. We have an event coming up on December 10th where we're going to ask about 12 local governments to participate in an event. Finally, the Strategic Growth Council is hosting listening sessions as it designs its Regional Climate Collaboratives program. So that received $20 million in the state climate package recently, and that's specifically to assist under-resourced communities in accessing state funding for climate change mitigation, adaptation, and resiliency projects. So it's not ready yet, but I think they want to make sure they're listening around the state to make sure they design that program properly. And I think a lot of you have a vested interest in that one in particular. So we are actually going to have a representatives from Strategic Growth Council here at the next meeting. So December 14th, the next LERN meeting, and they're going to have a discussion with us about that program. Okay, next slide, please. So a quick spotlight on one opportunity. So each month we're going to do this. We're going to go into a little more detail on one opportunity. Last month, participants asked about subsidized staffing opportunities. So today's spotlight focuses on fellowship programs. So the Civic Spark program and Climate Action Corps, they basically pay a person to join your team. You don't have to even allocate a position. Sometimes allocating positions is harder than finding funding, right? So I'm going to hand it off to our team member, Gabby Moore, who's going to tell us more about both of these programs. So thanks, Gabby.
Thanks so much, Angie. So yeah, as Angie said, we want to spotlight 2 fellowship programs. First, I want to highlight the Civic Spark program, which is the Local Government Commission's AmeriCorps program. Civic Spark, what it does, it places highly motivated emerging leaders with local organizations for an 11-month period. And this is to support research, planning, and implementation project for community resilience specifically. So what this looks like is Civic Spark Fellows complete projects that will support a local public agencies' resiliency needs around climate change adaptation or mitigation, affordable housing, energy efficiency, water management or policy, sustainable mobility, and even rural broadband. To date, Civic Spark Fellows are nearing 1 million hours of service to California communities. So the requirement for you, or specifically for local governments, is to become a Civic Spark public agency service recipient is that you must demonstrate a capacity need, which is measured by meeting at least one of the following criteria. So you either have to have a significant community-wide burden, an absence of an adopted and up-to-date strategy, and a defined resiliency capacity gap. And in the slide, you can see the application process and what it looks like as a summary, but I encourage local governments to look out for the application deadlines for the next cycle, which will start January 2022, or either contact Mackenzie Bolger, who's the project manager for Civic Spark, at the email that is on the slide for any additional questions. We also want to highlight the Climate Action Corps, which came as a part of OPR's and California Volunteers' comprehensive strategy to address the climate crisis. This program, what it does, it connects organizations and agencies with talented, motivated, emerging leaders. And this is to move the needle on climate change in the community. So fellows will serve with a host partner, which could be a local government, in a full-time capacity for a period of around 11 months. The current cycle just began and it placed 50 fellows to support climate projects for frontline communities. And the projects for a Climate Action Corps include either having a defined measurable climate pollution reduction resiliency benefit or disaster recovery activity, having community engagement and volunteerism components that will provide community members with a way to take action on climate change issues, and solutions to a community unique environmental or public health vulnerability that will help address disparities while promoting social and environmental justice. On the slide, you will have a link to the application if you are interested for the next cycle. The dates for that next cycle is not open, but I encourage everyone to stay tuned. And for more information, you can contact the program director for the CAC, which is placed at the Bay Area Community Resource, and her name is Rola Halawanji, and her email is on the slide as well. Under both of these programs, local government recipients sign an MOU and will provide workspace, direct supervision, and oversight to support a fellow's growth and development. These opportunities are great for local governments that are struggling with capacity constraints and will offer an opportunity to support the entry-level folks into the workforce. So I really encourage everyone to look them up. And with that, I would love to pass it to Angie to introduce our speaker.
Thank you so much, Gabby. That was a great overview. I had a Civic Spark person when I was on the inside of local government, and it was awesome. Totally recommend it. Okay, yeah, next slide, please. So let's go ahead and dive in. I kind of scanned through the chats. I didn't see anybody that needed to say anything out loud, but do scan the chats and continuously, if you think of something that can help your local government peers, even if it's an event, a training, funding, anything you can think of, share that in the chat, please. And let's just let's help each other out. Okay. So let's get into the meat of today. We are so fortunate to have Congressman Salud Carbajal with us today. Like I said, he represents the 24th Congressional District of California. The district includes the entirety of San Luis Obispo and Santa Barbara counties, which is where I'm located, and a portion of Ventura County. And this is where oil spills, drought, beach erosion, wildfire, and energy resilience are major concerns. So prior to representing the Central Coast in Congress, Congressman Carbajal also served as Santa Barbara County's first district supervisor for 12 years. And having worked under his leadership and spent lots of time briefing him, I can attest to his bold and consistent commitment to energy and climate issues. So he was the kind of local official champion that most of us sustainability staffers really dream of. He's a longtime advocate for our environment. His first act in Congress was the California Clean Coast Act, which bans future offshore oil and gas drilling on California's coast. He also introduced the Water Infrastructure Resiliency and Sustainability Act, as well as the Opportunity Zones Act, and he's co-sponsored the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act. So we might hear a little bit more about those things. He serves also as a member of the Bipartisan Climate Solutions Caucus, and he's a member of the House Committee on Armed Services, on Agriculture, and the House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, which he actually serves as vice chair. And given last week's news on the $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill, this is really good timing to have us here today. He's going to share his insights on how federal opportunities can translate to local impact. So I know all of our heads have been spinning lately. Hopefully he can help us guide the way. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll hand it off to you.
Thank you, Angie, and to the Local Government Commission and the California Climate Energy Collaborative, CEEC, and all the work that you're all doing to promote resiliency, to address climate change. Just very grateful for all your leadership. And yes, it's great to see you again, Angie. Clearly, I did okay for you to invite me back to participate with this new effort that you're involved with. So thank you very much. I hope I can share with you a little bit about what's going on in Washington and on some of these important issues. But first, a little bit about myself. I immigrated from Mexico when I was 5 years old. I'm the youngest of 7. My father worked in an underground mine in Arizona from my 1st grade through the end of my 6th grade elementary school year. When the mine closed, my father moved us to Oxnard, where he went back to working as a farm worker like he did during the 50s and the 60s during the Bracero guest worker program. After high school, I went to UCSB, where a school that is really much in tune with environmental protection and very progressive policies. After graduating, I met this wonderful woman by the name of Naomi Schatz, Supervisor Naomi Schatz, who became elected as the 1st District Supervisor. And she gave me an opportunity to work with her as her chief assistant. Back then, we didn't call ourselves chiefs of staff in local government. Eventually, that's the position that it was. And I learned a lot under her leadership, really learned to understand the substance behind environmental protection and climate change, resource protection, what resiliency really means, sustainability. All those issues from the standpoint of public policy was something I really became enlightened about. And obviously that comes on the shoulders of the mentorship I had from my own parents and other mentors along the way. But so that's where I think I learned and my values were inculcated in terms of environmental protection and my view of the dangers of not protecting the environment. And certainly my former boss, Naomi Schatz, who I mentioned, the late Naomi Schatz, because we lost her a few years ago, she became involved in public service after the 1969 oil spill. I obviously lived here on the Central Coast. No, I didn't. I immigrated in 1970, so it was a year after that, but I did not live here on the Central Coast. As I mentioned earlier, I went to Arizona for my early years, but Naomi Schatz lived here on the Central Coast. And it was that oil spill that catapulted her into public service. She was, everybody was appalled at this environmental disaster. That's where she cut her teeth. And as a result, she eventually worked for State Senator Gary Hart, eventually became the first female coastal commissioner chairwoman in the state's history. And so that just gives you a little bit about the person I worked for that really helped shape a lot of my views and values. So I don't need to tell you, in Santa Barbara County, we're all too familiar with environmental disasters, oil spills, the 1969 oil spill, the 2015 All-American Plains pipeline rupture oil spill. And so these issues, again, just continue to make us hyper aware of the challenges that the oil and gas industry have here directly off our coastline and onshore in many cases, as with the Plains pipeline rupture. But this is also the place where the environmental movement was greatly started and Earth Day commenced. So here in local government, I came on, in terms of my service, not only as initially staff, but then working as a county supervisor, worked for a number of years with Angie and others to address resiliency and climate change and resource protection off our coastline. And I'm proud to say that I learned from many local groups like the Environmental Defense Center, the Community Environmental Council, the local League of Conservation Voters, the Sierra Club, so many groups that have been at the forefront of environmental protection and also addressing climate change. In county government, as Angie mentioned, I worked on the 2010 Santa Barbara County Sustainability Action Plan. I think it was our first sustainability action plan that we put together. This plan looked at critical climate issues facing local governments like building energy efficiency, vehicle operations and fuel usage, mobile workforce, water conservation, solid waste and recycling, expanding solar opportunities, just to name a few. And now in Congress, I see that there is a need to assist with continuing to incentivize and provide funding to local governments to make sure that these projects will continue to move forward. And the best way that the federal government can do this is by incentivizing and providing resources. I sit on the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, the Agriculture Committee, and the Armed Services Committee. And so I have a unique vantage point of how each one of these spheres is relates to environmental protection, sustainability, resiliency, and the policies that we need to address and make sure are moving forward to address climate change. A little bit about my legislative agenda for the Central Coast. As Angie mentioned, my first piece of legislation I felt was important and symbolic and important for us to, for me to initiate the California Clean Coast Act, which would stop offshore oil and gas development off the coast of California. It included, it was also included, I'm proud to say, in the Buildback Better Act that we are working to move forward. And this moratorium, this prohibition I'm hoping will continue to stay in the legislation and make it over the finish line as soon as we pass the Buildback Better Act. And in addition to that, I've been working on, you might have seen today was the announcement, the designation process for the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary, which today NOAA announced that the process will be moving forward. Another piece of legislation I'm very proud of is the Central Coast Heritage Protection Act, which would designate over 250 acres of wilderness areas in the Los Angeles Padres area, Forest Padres area, and the Carrizo Plain National Monument. And as you all know, wilderness designations is the highest form of protection the government can give to public lands. It will ensure no future oil leasing. And again, I'm also working on with Congressman Panetta and Congresswoman Brownlee on the California Land and Protection Act, which would nullify the existing environmental impact report related to hydraulic fracturing that BLM's finalized in 2019. And this would require that until BLM circulates a new EIS considering all oil and gas development in the BLM's Bakersfield office planning area. Lastly, I am working to make the Central Coast a renewable energy hub, and I'm working with the Biden administration, the Department of Interior, the Department of Defense, and local stakeholders to move forward offshore wind energy off our coast in the Morro Bay area of San Luis Obispo County. This effort would produce 3 gigawatts of electricity in a 390 square mile area. Right now, Congress is focused on passing 2 transformative bills. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which we just passed on Friday, and the Buildback Better Act that we will be working to pass in the next few weeks. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act includes large investments in traditional infrastructure for American roads and bridges, water infrastructure, resilience, internet, and more. It adds 2 million jobs per year on average across the decade. And the Buildback Better Act makes historic investments to cut taxes for working and middle-class families and is one of the largest efforts to combat climate change. Whatever we were not able to include in the infrastructure bill because we had to reach a compromise for it to become bipartisan, a number of resilient, sustainable measures were left out. But our caucus felt that as long as we could get a lot of those into the Build Back Better Act, that we could still achieve our goals. And that's why the Build Back Better Act will have a number of key resilient and environmental measures that will really move addressing climate change forward. It will advance environmental justice while creating good paying jobs. It will be accelerating the deployment of clean energy technology, EV battery storage. It has $1 billion in zero emissions vehicle infrastructure, including construction of charging stations. $2.9 billion for creating a 21st century energy grid capable of ensuring the reliability and delivery of clean energy throughout the United States. It will expand and extend clean energy and EV tax credits, refundable new qualified plug-in electric drive motor vehicle credit for individuals. It will create a new credit for qualified commercial electric vehicles placed into service by the taxpayer, and much more. But I don't need to tell you, our work is cut out for us. Our coastline and natural environment on the Central Coast and California are renowned throughout the world for their abundant beauty. Addressing and growing threats of climate change should not be a partisan issue, and sometimes it's unfortunate that it is. And the impacts are widespread to our economy, public health, and our environment. And I don't need to tell you that those hardest hit with the climate change impacts are those most vulnerable communities and low-income communities. So we always need to keep equity at the forefront of all our policies that we move forward. I'm proud to have also served on President Obama's task force when he was in office on climate change to come up with a range of sustainable solutions to be implemented at the state and local levels. In Congress, I have worked across the aisle. I joined the Bipartisan Climate Solution Caucus and will continue to introduce legislation to safeguard our climate from harmful greenhouse gas emissions. It is essential to promote the development of renewable clean energy resources and achieve energy independence. We need to transition sooner rather than later from carbon fuels and make sure that we are balancing our energy portfolio with more renewable energy. And I'm proud to be a Californian because California has set really ambitious goals and has been doing a lot to make sure we are becoming resilient and have more renewable energy abundance than any other state. We know climate change is real and we need to act with a sense of urgency. I want to encourage you all to stay engaged in the process and work with all your representatives at the state level and at the federal level to continue to move the ball forward so that we are addressing climate change and protecting our natural environment and resources. With that, Angie, I'll turn it back to you.
Oh my goodness, thank you so much. Just thanks for your leadership. We continue to appreciate it. And the reason we asked Congressman Carbajal here is because that perspective that he has, having led local government and now representing in Congress, is just so valuable. So he could help us translate what's happening at the federal level to what really matters for us back in our communities. So I have a couple of questions that I'm going to warm up this Q&A session with, but I really want to invite folks in the audience to be asking your questions in the chat. So, and we'll try to get to those next. Okay. All right. So, back when I worked under your leadership, Congressman Carbajal, in Santa Barbara County, during the last major economic decline, which was back in 2009, you help champion the kinds of clean energy initiatives that put us in line for big federal stimulus dollars. So I know the pandemic is a very different scenario, but I'm just wondering if you can reflect on some of the parallels, differences, some of the lessons that are relevant to the challenges and opportunities facing local governments in 2021.
Well, I think it's, I hate to say this, but it's very similar to the past. We've done a lot of planning and a lot of good work throughout the state and a lot of goal setting. And we are now embarking on realizing some of those goals through various strategies. But what I think is important is for local governments to continue to update their sustainability plans, to make sure that they are up to speed and up to date, because now that federal funding is going to be flowing, like when ARA funding flowed in 2009, that local governments are positioned to take advantage of that funding sooner rather than later. So if you have energy goals, if you have whatever they might be in, whether it's in building developments, whether it's in solar, whether it's to make your buildings more efficient, whatever the case might be, charging stations, it's important to make sure those plans have been taken off the shelf and are really breathing, living documents, because there's going to be a lot of funding coming down the pipeline. And those local jurisdictions that are ready and have done that are going to be the ones that are going to be in the first phase of whatever funding becomes available.
That's right. And yeah, Santa Barbara County is a good lesson for that. We were ready, and we got some big dollars, and those dollars have continued, to support big programs that continue to last to today. So one more question for me, and then we're going to turn it over to audience. So given your experience in federal and local government, what essential roles do you think the federal government and local government can play individually and in collaboration to accelerate climate action on the ground?
Well, I mentioned goals earlier, and I think it's really taking advantage of federal resources and moving forward the strategies to address climate change, be it moving forward renewable energy, more solar, implementing infrastructure that will allow for more individuals to be incentivized to buy electric vehicles, making sure that local governments are moving forward best practices. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Things are happening throughout the country. Look at what Santa Barbara County just did with the energy conversion solid waste facility, which will address methane. And again, there are dollars at the federal level, whether it's through low-income, low-interest loans, whether it's grants. So I think there needs to be a relationship between the federal and the state and the local government. But local government should not just wait or rely on the federal and state governments. Local governments should be taking the leadership on these issues. And then when the federal government and the state government comes in with the incentives or federal funding, it all comes together very nicely. But local governments are the leaders on these issues. Oftentimes, it's not the federal government or the state government. And I think it's those governments that have taken the initiative and the leadership to develop plans, to identify goals, to identify infrastructure, whatever issues they have embarked on to address climate change and energy efficiency and resiliency are the ones that are going to be poised to get the benefit of those funds. So keep doing what you're doing, local governments, and do more of it.
Yes, thank you. And, I'm finding oftentimes the federal agencies are asking for local governments to tell them what they need. So when they do ask, that's the time to design these programs in a way that works for us. Okay, I'm going to move over to audience questions. So we have a question from Ty Keefe, and he's asking, please discuss drought remedies for California. Are you hearing about any additional desalination plants and or reuse plants like Fountain Valley? I'm not sure if you're familiar with that project.
If you look at the infrastructure bill, there's a funding in there for to address drought and water infrastructure, desalination, storage. As challenging and controversial as that is, bringing all stakeholders together to address if and where and how storage can transpire. storage, desal, gray water, recycling and infrastructure. There are a number of funds in the new infrastructure bill to help local communities do that. But that's how you address it. I mean, look at innovative communities or communities that have implemented innovative strategies. Recycling the gray water, actually turning it into drinking water. As gross as that sounds, that is a legitimate strategy. So, we have drought and it's multifaceted. We're gonna have more drought with climate change. We're gonna have year-round fire season. And the way you address these important issues is by making sure that we're becoming more water efficient and that we are building more opportunities to diversify our water supply. There's always that tug and pull in the Delta. There's the tug and pull of the twin tunnels, which is now one tunnel, I understand. But it's really a comprehensive solution to this very important drought challenge that we have in the West and especially here in California. There's no one panacea, but rather a combination of solutions and strategies.
Can I ask a follow-up? So you have a Water Infrastructure Resiliency and Sustainability Act that you've sponsored. Is that getting folded in somehow, somewhere?
A good part of that bill was already folded into a bill that passed in the past.
Oh, great.
For the EPA. And so there are grants that have become available through the EPA that basically emulated my legislation. My legislation was able to be put into a larger bill. The name of the bill is escaping me. I think it was one of the appropriations bills.
Okay.
But that's how that transpired.
Wow, amazing. Yeah, well, we'll have to look up those grants. I've seen a lot of Water Smart grants. Maybe that's one of the pathways. Thank you. Okay, so let's move into the next question. From Glen Sawyer, does Rep. Carbajal support moving California truck farming out of the Central Valley into greenhouses powered by excess forest biomass as a way to protect California agriculture production from climate change?
Say that again? That was a mouthful.
Yeah, okay, so he's asking, do you support California truck farming out of the Central Valley into greenhouses powered by excess forest biomass? That's a complicated question. It sounds like...
Let me address it. I think, anytime we can move towards more sustainable, resilient practices, best practices, we ought to consider it. But you never want to do something that has unintended consequences while you're trying to achieve one goal. So, for instance, trucking, what if we help turn many of those trucks into natural gas trucks or fueled by biome, like you said? Absolutely, we can do that. It's just a matter of incentivizing people to do it. One thing I've learned is that unless you provide resources to assist companies, individuals, or localities, grants and incentives, you can't force somebody to spend money doing something that, you're not helping them with the resources on. So we always need to keep in mind how we could incentivize people, how we could provide grants, and how we could work with people to achieve our goals. Why I think sometimes we fall short in trying to move from point A to point B on environmental protection, addressing climate change, is that we forget that there should be a process to do that, that you should leave no one behind. We should actually find ways to incentivize and avoid, there's a carrot and the stick, and you can do a combination of, but it's just a way of working collaboratively to achieve our goals. It doesn't always have to be adversarial. So as long as it's within that spirit, I think we can and we should.
Thank you. Our next question is, this one's real straightforward. Will the Buildback Better Act clear both the House and Senate next week?
Well, I'm not sure if it should be next week, but not next week, the week after, but I'm absolutely sure we're gonna pass something. The question is what? And we're getting close to that final product. Right now, we're just looking at the paid fors. I think there's wanting to make sure that it's paid for. I want to remind you all that The infrastructure bill was almost completely paid for, and the Buildback Better Act is going to be completely paid for by all the revenue streams that have been identified. It will pass, it will move forward.
Do you, and just a follow up to that, I mean, so we've had ARPA, now we have the infrastructure bill. Do you see Build Back Better as being the best opportunity we have to really address emissions from a federal investment perspective?
Absolutely. This is going to be a transformative, historic bill. It's already going to build on two other pieces of legislation that have been instrumental. One is we passed about 5 bills that were bipartisan to address the COVID pandemic in our country, to get people to stay afloat, to give them the stability to not go under. And, you know, we were having some real challenges as a country. And then we passed the American Rescue Plan in early this year. That was not one member of the other party voted for that, even though in the past, Democrats had voted for every other economic relief package. So it turned into a partisan, unfortunate partisan circumstance. But that bill was transformative. It continued to add to make sure that our society was getting back on its feet. Now we passed the infrastructure bill, which is a $1.2 trillion infrastructure proposal. That's historic and making some of the largest investments we've ever made in recent decades to make sure not only our infrastructure is being modernized, but that we're creating jobs and we're doing it in the most resilient fashion. It could have been more resilient, but to make it a compromise, a number of those resilient measures were taken out. Now, the Build Back Better Act is going to address, in addition to address climate change and resiliency in one of the most fundamental transformative investments that has ever been made is going to be in this legislation. Not to mention it addresses so many other social inequities that have formed over the decades. We've seen income and profits for corporations and the wealthiest Americans go straight up. I mean, it's never even been a bleep, it just moved. And for your average middle class working family, it's been going down like that. Something is really wrong. And what this legislation is doing is finally giving a major tax break, not to those 1%, but to all of the American people. It's giving them a huge tax break, addressing social inequities that have been created over the decades, and addressing climate change like we've never addressed it before.
I love it when you get excited. Yeah, and you know, it's confusing out there for folks trying to follow along. And the other names that this is being called is a social spending and climate package, right? Or the social spending and climate bill, I think it's being referred to. Uh-oh, you're muted.
Keep in mind, some people like to call it spending. Like when they spend, they don't want to call it spending. They want to call it, these are investments. And yeah, keep in mind that the Build Back Better Act is completely paid for, completely paid for. I know a few years ago, there was a major tax reform that moved forward under other leadership. 83% of the benefit was given to the top 1% in our country, 83%, and it was not paid for. It added $2 trillion to our national debt. This, on the other hand, is making major investments, giving a tax break to middle working class families, and it's completely paid for. So I just want to remind everybody of that.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Kurt Johnson, for that question. Great question. Let's move to the next question here. So there's a couple of questions about sort of how local governments and their implementation. Wanting to know, will the infrastructure bill mean more funding for current projects or the development of more? And then with that, implementation of Katie Hendrick is asking, implementation of projects becomes more and more important as climate change impacts get worse, but to be shovel ready requires significant time, prior investment that the local governments often don't have. Is there any discussion about providing funding for capacity and or technical assistance for local governments to push through some of these barriers? That's a great question.
Well, there's two questions you put together. The first one is yes for existing and yes for new projects. I think there's going to be resources and grant funding and direct funding for both types of projects. And when it comes to the second question, remind me again the second question.
Yeah, it's basically, is there any discussion about providing funding for capacity and or technical assistance for local governments to push through some of the barriers?
I think naturally there will be funds for that, but I will tell you that, again, local governments should have and should continue working on all these issues aggressively. Those that planned in advance and have addressed their needs through deferred maintenance, capital projects, capital plans, are all going to be in a position to move forward. I mean, some people say shovel ready, and that means so much. There's some that have already done environmental review and are going to be at the forefront of getting off the blocks on projects, and those are going to take the lead. But government should have and should continue to work on a lot of these issues, and I'm sure there will be funds for technical assistance as well.
I'm seeing more and more of that, and that's part of what we do in these meetings is try to highlight those opportunities. But I think what we're hearing, folks, you have this window right now where money's coming. It's time to get your partnerships and your plans together.
Angie, if I could just say,
yeah.
For instance, fire resiliency. We always talk about, when there's fires, we're always bringing the resources there, and then we're trying to get reimbursed local governments from the federal government, and we put forward, all these studies and claims. And many local governments, having served in local government, we say, well, what about mitigating for fires in advance, or pre-positioning of our resources when we know it's high fire hazard conditions? Why can't we get paid for that? Or why can't we do that? Well, we are. I think the federal government is now transitioning to provide for mitigation projects and measures that local governments want to implement. So there will be funds to address a lot of those things in a non-traditional way. Unlike in the past, I think there are funds through FEMA and others to be able to do some of these innovative best practices.
Totally agree. There's a comment that went along with that topic. So Alice LaPierre says cities have public works staff who can manage energy efficiency projects. What we need is grant funding to actually do the work. We don't get tax breaks, tax credits, etc. And that none of those incentives work for local governments. We need grant funding or at least interest-free loans. Absolutely. From what I can tell, agencies are hearing that message.
Yeah, absolutely. Good point. And I think the federal government has moved to implement a number of programs to address those issues.
And we'll do our best to be tracking all those technical assistance opportunities. So there's one more question, and maybe we'll just do a quick answer on this one because we're running low on time. But San Mateo, it's coming from somebody at San Mateo. What are your thoughts on data access versus privacy? I think it's an equity issue. For example, the electricity or natural gas used at properties was generated or fracked someplace else, complete with environmental justice issues in those areas. These are shared resources. In California, there are data privacy rules thwarting agencies from getting the data they need to produce GHG emission inventories. Why should they use data? Why should data be private for water, for VMT, for energy? Why should use data be private?
Well, I think you can have some aggregate data. There should be a balance where there should be more transparency and there should be aggregate data that agencies and the public should have access to. I mean, certainly nobody has any business in knowing how much Angie Hacker is using for electricity or water or what have you, but certainly aggregate-wise from blocks or cities or certain geographic areas, nothing is wrong with being able to collect data from an aggregate general standpoint. Don't forget, we kind of already do that when you look at conservation efforts. Well, we've conserved 20%, or, nothing is wrong with doing that. I don't know about, individual data, I don't think is necessarily as important as aggregate data.
Thank you. And you know, I don't know the name of that person, but I would encourage you to contact me directly. I think you might be somebody we would really like to have at those intimate feedback sessions with the California Air Resources Board, which is going to be all on the topic of climate action planning and GHG inventories. Okay, so thank you. I think that's our segment with Congressman Carbajal. I really appreciate you spending the time with us. That was fabulous. Everybody should probably give some virtual claps for Representative Carbajal. And I hope we stay in touch. And good luck out there. Thank you for everything you're doing.
Thank you, Angie. And again, I hope that the funding of that legislation didn't come across as being political, but it was just factual about what is paid for and what it's not. And investments versus spending.
Yeah, I gotcha. I agree. All right. We're going to move into our last segment. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Take care. Okay, this is our final segment of the day, and this is our Ask the BPC. So thanks everybody for really good questions, by the way, and we're asking for more discussion in our last few minutes here. So this is a standing opportunity to submit questions now. It's for me. But really when you ask me a question, it's likely, if I can answer it offhand, I will. It's likely that you're basically submitting a request so I can go find information for you. And I might bring it back here. I might use it as content for a future event, or I might get back to you with an answer. And so I want to just open the floor for anybody who has any questions that they've been holding in their own work that you might just need a little bit of information. As you're doing that too, I have some responses to some things that have come up since our last meeting. So team. Okay, so some folks want to be included in the CARB conversation. So feel free to be raising your hand. I'd love to hear voices during this segment. Okay, so while you all are thinking, and so Gabby and John and Ryan, if you see something come through, please just interrupt me, okay? I did want to mention, because last time we met, somebody had asked about what's the state doing to regulate gas? So all the local governments are working on electrification ordinances and no gas bans and things like that. And I just wanted to make sure you all are aware that you could go and look at Title 24, the 2022 building codes, and that they do require new buildings to be electric ready. And there's some other provisions in there that are supportive of electrification while it doesn't do a full gas ban. And so what I wanted to do is just drop into the chat a summary that came out from the California Energy Commission about what is in, kind of just a real high-level summary of what's in the next code. So that's in the chat. Another thing that came up was local governments, the role of local governments in addressing high global warming potential emissions. And I remember mentioning refrigeration programs. And what I wanted to do here was to just highlight for you one program that a CCA is offering. It's just an example of what local governments can do. It's a refrigerator, so it's like appliance replacement program. Team, are you seeing anything come up? Oh, here's one. I would love to know if any cities here have updated their green building policies to include ZNE, passive house standards, or bans on natural gas. Forward any plans to me. Okay, so she gave her email address. So that's from somebody from Berkeley, thank you. Bans on natural gas, you know who I'd go to ask about that would be Amy Ryder at the Building Decarbonization Coalition. Somebody's asking, are any local governments considering ordinances for retrofitting existing buildings? So I think folks are asking questions of each other, and I'd be happy if anybody wanted to raise a hand and answer out loud in our last couple of minutes. I will say I've interviewed some people recently that are tackling existing buildings and also building in sort of an equitable electrification planning process. Targeting, they may have already done their ordinances on new construction. Now they're focused on existing buildings. So San Jose and Berkeley. Am I getting those right? I think those are the two that I looked at most recently. Those would be good examples and we can put that in our resource document when we wrap this meeting up. Okay, oh, thank you. So somebody from San Jose says we're not in the ordinance stage, but we'll be bringing a plan for retrofitting existing buildings to our city council in April. Thank you. Yeah, San Jose is certainly one of the leaders here to follow. Palm Springs will be considering a retrofit ordinance. Great. Kim Springer says, when will the code require that all new construction have critical resiliency circuits be wired separately for DR or green backup? Amazing. I don't have that question offhand, but I'm wondering if anybody here does, and if not, we can try to bring that back next time. One more question I have for the group. City of Encinitas, I believe, passed a building ordinance. Great. One more question I have for the group for you is, we are doing a lot of outreach right now with our disadvantaged communities. So jurisdictions that serve disadvantaged community census tracts. Well, some of what we're learning is that it seems like many jurisdictions are trying to work with the SASH program with grid alternatives, providing free solar installation for low-income residents. And it's all great and good, but they get to the point where they realize there's a gap in funding where required roof improvements are not funded, and they find that to be a big barrier. There are a few governments that are trying to figure out solutions, and I'm bringing it up because I'm wondering if this is a topic for a little mini meeting amongst local governments who've come across this problem and are trying to address it. And if so, I'm just inviting you to email me because I probably want to throw together a little meeting so folks can share solutions. Oh, Amy's here. Lots to talk about. Existing building electrification. We are working on a statewide fact sheet on this topic as we speak. So Amy is awesome and providing her email address. Thank you so much. I'm glad you're here. All right, team, did anything else come up that I didn't get to?
No, I think we captured everything that's come through the chat.
Well, that's perfect timing. Let's go to the next slide. This is just a reminder about our services. So the SEEK program offers a lot of different services, and we're overseen by the local government commission. We're funded by the RENs and others. And our job is to advance knowledge amongst local governments and those that work with them. So as you're working to pursue your local energy and climate goals, this is just an overview of what we offer. So news and events, technical assistance, funding resources, and best practices. So I think you all know that. I invite you to continue to come to these meetings to get this Cliff Note version of everything you need to know. So you can go back to your work and be a little bit more informed. Next slide, please. And with that, so our next meeting will be December 14th. Like I said, we are so happy to have a representative from the Strategic Growth Council, and we're going to dive in to the new investments that have recently been made in the regional climate collaboratives. And so this is going to be kind of another version of a listening session. There's going to be questions for you and information for you. Please do share this invitation with others. We want to grow this group, but we had really good participation today. When you come back next time, come with questions, come with updates and opportunities. And in the meantime, if you have any suggestions for programs that or speakers that you want us to invite, you can send those our way as well. We'll be following up over email with the recording, the notes, and the slides. So thank you all so much for your participation, and we will see you next time.